But we find ourselves this morning once more, if you like, in front of that big screen, captivated by this dramatic and fast-moving story that we have begun to look at here in Genesis 19. Remember, this is not some make-believe Hollywood production that we have. This is it involves real people who lived in real homes, in real cities, in a real valley, roughly 4,000 years ago. And by this gripping account from Moses' pen, we are transported back in time to unfold in this chapter. Remember last week I was encouraging you to have a remote control as we looked at the drama unfold and hit pause. So I want to encourage you to, in your minds, to have access to that. But just before we reach to that remote and resume this dramatic story, let me remind you where we are. For about 18 years, Lot and his family have chosen to live in the fertile valley of Jordan, or sometimes called the Valley of Siddim. It is referred to that in Genesis 13. Now this move by Lot and his family some 18 years before for his career. But it was disastrous. It was a disastrous move spiritually for him and his family. The bulk of the 18 years that Lot has been living in this grossly sinful area, he has lived with his family in the city. Remember, this was his deliberate choice. For 15 years now, Lot has been resettled in Sodom. Remember? After temporarily being taken away from Sodom because of those invading forces, taken away as prisoner. But even when he was given to make a clean break with Sodom, Lot foolishly took his wife and daughters back into that horrible city. Lot was a believing man. But due to his little exercise of the muscle of faith, his faith was weak. He had regularly compromised the Lord's standards. Such compromises, as we have observed in the other narratives previously, such compromise sent him in a spiral spiritually downward. That spiral led him to that place, as we saw last week, where he finds himself, due to his own doing, in a horrible crisis in this first section of Genesis 19. As we'll see today, not only is Lot's faith weak, Lot's witness was weak due to his compromises. And his hypocritical life had a very weak witness. If it was not for the grip of God's grace upon his life, in the end, it seems, as we'll see today, Lot would have still chosen Sodom rather than flee its destruction. So here we are seeing two angels come to visit Lot in Sodom. Lot insists that those angels stay in his house, not out in the local town square. But when a mob of men, virtually the whole city, assembled, that's when Lot found himself in the thick of it, in a real crisis. The mob were a group of homosexual men. They were wanting access to Lot's visitors. And yet in that story we saw last week, remember, we got glimpses of Lot's righteousness, that it was flickering, it was shining, at times darkness. But so we also saw Lot's confusion. When he offers his virgin daughters as something to pacify those men, we see a man who is mixed up and confused morally. We paused the story last week when we got to that point where the close to breaking point in verse 10 and 11. Lot himself was about to break. Remember, his ribs, we said, were, as a description of the pain, his ribs were popping, his eyes were bulging, as there on the outside of that door, the mob of men were at that house, and Lot is between the homosexual mob in their violent rage outside and his house and the front door. That's where we pause the story. Remember that the angels reached out in some amazing, miraculous way, grabbed Lot, inside the house, closed. They struck those men with mental blindness. Some sort of fatigue and weariness comes over them as they, in their perversion, still are seeking to find the door and get access until they're so weary. The crowd disperses into the night. Now, our focus this morning is going to steam as we consider what I've entitled Lot in the Grip of Grace. Lot in the grip of grace. And there are four things that I want us to think about as we try and work our way through this story. The first one will be the angelic announcement. The second thing we'll look at, the third thing we'll see is the dawning day. And then the last thing is the gracious grip. I'll give you those four as we go through a little later. So let's now in our minds reach for our remote and hit play again as the story begins to roll, as the narrative begins to unfold, as Moses' Spirit continues on in what is to us verse 12. We see the scene, remember. The scene inside Lot's house. The door closes as Lot is pulled inside by the angels. The violent, noisy mob is outside. And there, perhaps, to regain his breath, he tries to find somewhere to sit down. He's struggling with the pain of his ribs, of he's aching perhaps all over as his whole body has been pressed against the door. The mob is still outside. They're frantically trying to get in at the door, and then yet as the minutes go on, the noise begins to subside. And we hear the feet walk away. Think of the family inside. They turn to each other and they're wondering now, who are these guys? This amazing rescue for our either husband or father. So far in the story, from what we've been able to ascertain, the visitors have not revealed to Lot why they've even come to Sodom. But due to this miraculous, Lot knows that these two guys in his house with him are more than just mere men because of what they've just done. But why had these angels come to town? To this town? Well, the angels announced the reason for their visit in verses 12 and 13. To Lot, have you anyone else here, son-in-law, your sons, your daughters, whomever you have in the city, take them out of this place. For we will destroy this place because the outcry against them has grown great before the face of the Lord, and the Lord has sent us to destroy it. Here we see the angelic announcement. The angels' visit has a twofold purpose, at least according to their own announcement. They say that the outcry against these people has grown great. It's like it's been rising up to heaven. And the Lord has sent us to destroy this place. Well, what were these people known for? We've looked at this in a previous study. They are known for idleness. These people are known for violence. They are known for oppression. And most obviously, that which stands out to us in chapter 19. They are known for their sex, in particular the sin of homosexuality. God has been patient with these people for a very long time. But punishment from the just Lord is due. Abraham earlier that day had prayed back in Genesis 18 and verse 25, Judge of all the earth, do right. And we know the answer. He always does what is right, what is just, what is fair, and what is deserved. He always does what is righteous. Long before God stoned His moral law, according to Romans chapter 2, that law was written on man's heart. These Sodomites, though they lived hundreds of years before Moses and the Ten Commandments, against their conscience. That law of God written upon the heart of man according to Romans 2. And therefore the judge of all the earth will do what is just and fair. He does what is right. So what does God do? From heaven to enact his battle plan. So they come to the city to destroy that place. But the angelic announcement also included a rescue mission in the midst of it. That's what they say in verse 12 effectively. Have you anyone in the law, your sons, your daughters, and whoever you have in the city, take them out of this place. Well, who did Lot have in that place? Who were those in Lot's family? Well, it's interesting as we look closely at the angel's words here. The angels firstly mention, and we know from verse 14 that he had at least 2 sons-in-law. One who were either married to 2 of his daughters or perhaps at least betrothed to his daughters. But if they were married to his daughters, then we can at least say we can see by what's being said here, and their husbands, which means at this point, as we look at the numbers, there is 4. But then the angel mentions in verse 12, Lot's sons. And again, notice that this one is in the plural, which suggests, obviously, that there is at least 2. Also in the passage, do we hear about Lot having sons? But again, if we just take this for what it is saying, we can say that at least there is another 2. So, obviously, doing the math, that means we now have 6 potential people in. But then in verse 12, the angels also mention Lot's daughters. And we know, bound from verse 16, that he had 2 daughters at home at the point when he fled. Now we have 8 people. Plus, of course, who we got? Mrs. Lot and Lot himself. Now, isn't that interesting? In chapter 18, in Abraham's prayer for Sodom, those of you who know that, we don't have time to go and look into all of that, but do you remember what number Abraham stopped at when he is praying with God and coming down numerically? He stops at 10. Now, we should say there is some uncertainty due to the ambiguous Hebrew expression as to whether the sons-in-law are only betrothed or already married to his daughters. And that is reflected in different translations into English. So perhaps, if we take perhaps there was only 6. Lot and his wife, the 2 daughters at home, and the 2 sons-in-law who were at least betrothed. Well, whatever it is, whether it's 6, whether it's 8, or even if it's 10, that's not a very large number, is it? In that valley, the rest of the people are unrighteous. And there's even question, is there not, about some of those that are listed as to whether they are righteous or unrighteous. God is a just judge. And He will. And actually the tense that is used here by Moses describing or giving the words of the angels gives the idea that God's wrath has already been poured out. And we know that. We've seen that last week as the aspect of blindness has already showed. God's wrath is all. And that is consistent with Romans chapter 1 and verse 18 that says, the wrath of God not will be revealed. The wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all unrighteousness of men. This is not just something that will yet come to pass. This has been. So God's wrath is actively poured out now on the unrighteousness of men, on all unrighteousness of men. It was in Lot's day, and it is in our day. So the angelic troops, they've been dispatched from heaven. And the Lord has sent us. Having come of their own decision, God gave them the orders, as it were. And they arrived in Sodom with this mission, and their orders were, you must go and destroy that place. Like it, the God of heaven and earth is about once more to move into centre stage and execute catastrophic judgment. But before that happens, the angels have a rescue mission. Righteous Lot must be delivered from destruction. And Lot himself must go and grab his family and take them out of that place. That's what they're saying in verse 12. Have you not got someone else in this city? Do you not have others in your family? Or whoever you have in the city, take them out of this place. Relate to this angelic announcement. The destruction of the unrighteous and the deliverance of the righteous. So in obedience to the angel's direction, Lot goes to find his family. And we see in verse 14 what it says. So Lot went in law, who had married his daughters, and said, Get up, get out of this place, for the Lord will destroy this city. And here, perhaps in a summary statement of not all that he said, but a summary statement of if you like, the kernel of what he said, we see, secondly, the pleading. Moses tells us that Lot, in verse 14 there at the start, Lot went out. Presumably now, the coast is clear outside that front door, outside the house. So Lot ventures out of the house and he goes elsewhere, it seems, in the town. Lot then, when he finds his sons-in-law, wherever they are located, Lot assumes the role of a pleading preacher. Now, friends, let's reach for our remote and hit pause right here. This is righteous Lot. The risk of danger as he ventures into Sodom's wicked, dark streets in order to get to his family. Lot shows himself by this action to be a believing man. He believes the angel's announcement. He acts upon it. He believes that the Lord is the one who is about to act in judgment. We see that from his own words that Moses records in verse 15. He doesn't say the angels will do this. He is acknowledging who ultimately is doing this. He says the Lord will destroy this. We hear those words, get up, get out of this place. Is there not a sense of urgency in what he's saying? Can you not feel the pathos in the words, the passion, the burden in the words of this man? We get the impression, don't we, that he really believes what he's saying. He's put to bed, perhaps, to get up out of their house, to get up out of those streets, and to get out those city walls, and to get out of the city. Because the Lord is going to destroy this city. We release the pause and return to the scene. We see the response that the preacher received. The end of verse 2, his sons-in-law, he seemed to be joking. Now hit the pause again. Let's just stop here for a breath. To his sons-in-law, he seemed to be joking. The Hebrew word there is the word for laughter. That Moses used back in chapter 18 in reference to Sarah's response to the angel's serious news that she would have a son. You remember the scene? Sarah's there behind the curtain of the tent somewhere. She overhears and she laughs. Now, was it a joke that she was laughing? They are giving serious news. She laughs. It's the very same word. As a response to a serious message. And here we have Lot. He's dead in earnest. He's motivated by deep-seated love for his family. But they think it's a joke. They snicker amongst themselves. They're giggling at each other as Lot announces the judgment of God. It's a very sober subject that Lot is declaring. God's judgment. Respond. They mock. They jest. They make fun of this whole situation. Such a response as this is frightening. It reveals the hardness of heart. Even while I've been preaching before, people laughing as if it's some sort of joke. Now, sometimes things may be humorous, it's fine. But to laugh when it's serious? I know some of you have witnessed this. You've told me you have witnessed people poking each other. As if to say, is this guy real? This is some sort of joke. Did you hear that? Lot's sons-in-law thought this was a joke. It seems they thought that Lot was a joke. You see, people leverage with their conscience over the time that they had known him. No respect for Lot. In their minds, Lot was someone in the end who perhaps you tolerated, but you didn't take seriously. His lifestyle, their respect. Lot stood in front of them like a clown. Like the clown in the theatre. Some of you may have heard this story that's sometimes told. A clown in a theatre who stood in front of the audience. There's a fire that's broken out back. And as the clown comes to inform the audience and he tells them of what's happening, they thought it was a joke. And they just laughed at him. They just applauded him. So he repeated his serious warning. And they shouted even louder. They are literally dressing up as clowns in an attempt to communicate God's truth. And ultimately, how does the world respond? They just laugh. They think it's a joke. The message of judgment anymore, because there is a lack of credibility. We move now in the story to verse 15. When the morning dawned, the angel, arise, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, lest you be consumed in the punishment of the city. And here we see the third thing from this passage, the dawning day. Notice the language of Moses in verse 15. When the morning, the time frame. So as the first light begins to dawn in the eastern sky, time is running out. This is the morning of the day of judgment for that place. The story moves forward now. It's like the drama, if you like, continues even more so to intensify. Remember, Lot had gone in the night. He'd gone to persuade his sons-in-law, but he returns home without them. And perhaps it's only been a few hours that has passed, and he knows that days will come up over the eastern mountain. Remember, it's a valley. And those sun rays will be starting to beam into the valley of Siddim. Today was the day of judgment of God. The day that God would visit that place in vengeance. The situation is... This is the time as the morning dawn for action. Otherwise, Lot and his family will be swept away in the coming judgment. Remember, the angels know the plan. It seems to be that the angels understood that once the sun begins to rise above then the invasion, as it were, then the attack comes. Time is of essence at dawn of the day of invasion. But here Moses shows us Lot is not moving too fast. Though we are, as we watch what's happening through this narrative, we're on the edge of our seats saying, get out of there, Lot. And we want to say, don't we, as we see Lot here hesitating, we want to use the very words of the angels and say to Lot, as we read this in the passage, get up, Lot. Take you with you. Don't stay there lest you be swept away in judgment. Come on, Lot. And yet Moses tells us at the start of verse 16 that Lot lingered. He hesitated. He was delaying. And again we say, they've just told you are loitering. They're urging you to hurry, and here you are. You're lingering. Lot, you're nuts. Come on, man, get out of that place while you have an opportunity. Quit lingering and start running. Because in many ways, friends, they're doing at dawn. Once they had enough light to see, they should have been running out of their house, running out that front door, running down the streets of Sodom, running out of the gate, and running until they get to the mountains. Remember, it's only a matter of hours before that crushed due to the violence of that horrible mob. But now we see, scratching our heads, now we see this man is reluctant to leave those people. On one hand, Lot seems to believe the angels in his head, but on the other, is pulled towards Sodom. Lot is an indecisive man. Lot is a confused man. He knows he has to leave, but there's something in him that just doesn't want to. He's believed the message. There's something inside that I just don't want to. Can you see that Lot is a hypocrite? Only hours before, he was preaching to his get out of Sodom. But now, he doesn't want to do what he himself was telling them that they should do. Is that not another reason why he has so little credibility? Why he has so little righteous family? Because they know him. And they've seen many times his hypocrisy. Do as I say, but not as I do. His hypocrisy blunted the impact of his faith was weak. Can you see? His witness was weak as well. What are the lessons that we can learn from Lot so far from this passage today? Well, let me just raise these things by way of question. How credible is our witness? How effective is our influence, especially those of us who are parents? Is it listen to us, or that we seem to have so little righteous influence over our young people? Is that due to the fact that far too often we do not practice what we preach? That we have the same... Why is it that some Christian husbands, for instance, try to persuade their wives, but they make so little progress? Is it because they are most often rude to them? Belittle them to them? Then they wonder why they have wives who struggle to respect them? Or is part of the problem why children and young people refuse to submit to their parents? I'm saying all the problem, but to such a problem, is that due to the fact that there is a lack of respect, and especially this becomes evident most often, perhaps most often with mum? And when mum says something, there's no response. Now, of course, there's many reasons why that. But could it be in many cases that the children have been watching mum, and they have learned by what they have observed that as a wife she will not submit to her husband, and they have learned from her, and her words are blunted and have no impact and little respect in their hearts because what they have seen? What about our witness more broadly? What about our witness of our workmates, our neighbours, our fellow students? Do they view us as some sort of... Is our witness weak like Lot's due to our hypocrisy? Do we say one thing and do another? Surely these are some of the lessons we need to consider seriously if we're in light of this as a mirror that we look into, not holding up for others to see. This is about you. But see, hey, is God addressing this to me? Lot was a believing man. Lot knew what he had to do. Christian friend, what duty has God been pressing upon you lately? You know you should do it, but you just stubbornly don't want to. Is it that you're like Lot, when you should be running in the way of obedience? In contrast to Lot, listen to David. He says this in Psalm 119. He says, I have thought about my ways. I made haste and did not delay to keep your commandment. He dallied around. David made haste to obey. We come back to the passage. We look at verse 16, and this is the fourth thing. The gracious grip. And while he lingered, the men took hold of his hand, his wife's hand, and the hands of his two daughters, the Lord being merciful to him. And they brought him out and set him outside the city. Freeze the scene right here. The men took hold of his hand, his wife's hand, and the hands of his two daughters, the Lord being merciful to him. And they brought him out and set him outside the city. Angels' hands at work again. Hands that effectively were God's hands. Those angels had four hands, didn't they? Two men, two hands each, four hands. Grabbed hold of one of Lot's family who were in the house. That's what Moses is saying to us. The men took hold of his, Lot's hand, one hand, by one of the hands of the angels, his wife's hand, and there's another angel, the hands of his two daughters. And yet the thing is that Lot is the one who is the focus. Moses repeats this, doesn't he? Let's not miss this repetition. It's Lot, he says, who lingered. The reason that he gifts us for delivering the family is not because Lot was sort of merit for him. The passage clearly says, and if you're someone taking to underline things in your Bible, if you underline anything in this chapter, surely it's these words, the Lord being merciful to Lot, is extended to Lot. This is the grace of God. The gracious grip of God on Lot's life. Those angels grabbed Lot by the hand, and because he was tight in their grip, he was rescued. And from that verse, that if this gracious grip of God's hand was not extended to Lot at this point, that Lot would have lingered even longer in the house in Sodom. You see, like each one of us, left to him, brought destruction upon himself, but for the grace of God. You see that, friends? Here we see in this passage, Lot needed more than the word that came from God, that was delivered to him by their messengers. Lot needed God to intervene in his life, and that's God's grace. And that's what God does to save any of us. Yes, He sends the messengers. Yes, we hear the message. But that message must be accompanied. How long did some of us listen to the message? How long was it that we knew in our heads the message? And in some ways, we would have said, we believed the message. But the message itself doesn't save. It's only when God reaches out, as it were, and grabs us by His grace, using that message, that we're saved. If it were not for the good with Lot, he would have lingered longer. And he would have been swept into judgment. You see that? If it was not for the grip of God's grace in our lives, we too would be swept away in judgment, just like Lot. We may be persuaded to do what is right and what is the right thing at least to do. But the passing pleasures of sin, the attractions of this world will leave us in this state where we are vulnerable to the judgment of God. Oh, how we should be grip of our sovereign Lord. You know, ultimately we see in this passage what I've entitled the message. Lot in the grip of grace. That's ultimately what we see in these verses. He was a believer, one of God's chosen people. He was in the grip of God's grace. And though left to himself, he would have pursued his temporary pleasures. And yet God was committed to saving this man from himself and his own folly, saving this man from judgment. Lot was secure. Not due to his own faith. We have seen how weak that faith was. His security lay in the grip of grace. We see these angels. How we as Christians are to act like these angels. Exercising a grabbing hand toward others. You remember the verse in Jude where it says, others save with fear, pulling them out of the fire. The act to snatch is an act of urgency. You don't snatch something slowly, do you? When a little child comes and snatches something, it's quick movement. There's an urgency about it. I want that thing. Snatch is urgent. And that's the language of Jude. Others snatching them out of the fire. Now, it is most likely that when Jude wrote that, he had Lot in his mind as he writes those words right to the end of his short epistle. Ultimately, it was God's hand that graciously saved in this story. He used the means of His heavenly messengers to save him. And my brothers and sisters, can you not see that God has chosen us to use us as His earthly servants? Enter into a filthy city. It's a horrible place. But they were willing to go for their master. And they were willing to pluck out the brand of fire the brand from the fire, in order that some may be saved. And we are to go to some. We are to snatch them from His willing, obedient servants, and at times be even willing to go into those places or with those people that are not so pleasant or socially acceptable to us. Hating even the garments defiled by the flesh, Jude says. But nevertheless, with a gracious grip, loving them, pleading with them, bringing them with us, if we can, by the grace of God. You see, if we have been ourselves grabbed by God's grace, then surely our greatest privilege, the saving hand of God through us as the means to others. We are to go with compassion. We are to love the sodomites. We are to show the love and compassion who was known to be our friend of sinners. There are some of you here today You know the message. You know, flee from the judgment to come. And you believe that Jesus is coming back again, and when He does, He will usher in the final day of judgment. You believe that? And already it's beginning to show, as it were, in the morning sky. You know that the judgment day is coming soon. And you know that your only hope of being ready for the judgment is by going to Jesus Christ. But still, some of you linger. You delay leaving your sin, which will get consumed in judgment if you don't go to Christ. You delay turning to Jesus and surrendering your all to Him. The grabbing grace of God is here today. Now is the day of salvation. Seek the Lord while He may be found. Call upon Him while He is near to you now. Be gripped, my friend, by the compassion of God. It's on display in this passage, in this story. It's being on display in your life. He has been so patient with you. Don't linger any longer. Be gripped by the grabbing grace of God. May all of us give glory to this God of grace today. May we exalt Him who are His, and may we enjoy Him, His gracious grip upon us.